Thank you for the intro, and thanks for having me here. Let me pop ahead here. Wow, there's a lot to cover. So I know you guys are MFA, which MBA, MFA. What is it actually? It's MFA, right? So that's right. So for me, it's interesting because it's a different conversation than I think most design students that I engage. And most design students I speak with tend to be in a very early stage of their career. And to me, it's also very important, but I think where you guys are is a very different animal in a way, and I think much more interesting conversation because you bring a variety of expertise to the table, which, let's say, younger designers tend to not have. And so I think what I'd like to take you guys through is a little bit about my journey in some ways, but to show you that design, I don't think, is what they say it is. I think it could be very much what you want it to be. So we'll touch on what that means. I'd like to think you guys can just like shout at any time, raise your hand, just like ask questions, totally cool. Hopefully you would, and don't feel shy to do that. If you want to hold it for the end, also cool. If you want to hold it for the end for a chat later, I'm happy to do that. So, but keep it loose. This is kind of a sampler of everything I sort of do to see what strikes the nerve for you guys. So yeah, let's just jump right in. I do what I call strategic differentiation. That's really what I think I am selling, and what I care about in the world is helping businesses find their unique voice. And so it's not about my voice, it's about theirs. And that's easier said than done in some ways, but I can explain what I mean by that. So my small business, we're based out in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. We just hit 25 years. We didn't only live in the Navy Yard, but so it's been a while. And so we do sort of two things, sort of object, product, physical design, and at the other side of it is the advisory service. And the advisory service was born out of frustration, which I might touch on some of that, making products for companies, and they don't really know why they're asking you to make what you're making was very much the situation. So over the years, you started asking, are you sure you need this? And have you considered this other reason? And have you thought of these 10 other things? Have you asked your market? Very simple questions, and you'd be surprised. Often the answer is we hadn't considered that. So sooner than later, I ended up finding myself in building strategies for companies, and sort of the product design kind of came after. So it kind of reversed itself. And when I started design in the 1990s, sort of design strategy was somehow kind of unframed. It wasn't something people really leaned into at the time. So I kind of walked backwards into it, I guess you could say. The product design side, it's kind of the classic stuff, nothing you're unfamiliar with. And I think even the advisory side, probably nothing you're unfamiliar with. So again, it's sort of the two sides to the same coin, which is why I think it's a holistic approach. I think it's hard to do one without the other in a way. So to walk you through a little bit about the way I think about things is I like to think I'm not a vendor. I don't work with a company to, here, Todd, here's a brief, go make this thing, and okay, this many hours, and then it's done. I don't think of it that way. And I equate it to a doctor. I don't think you walk into a doctor's office and say, hey, doctor, my side is hurting, and just write me a prescription for this, and I need to go see this surgeon. I know exactly what it is. I don't think you speak to a doctor this way. I think you say, hey, I have this pain. These are my symptoms, and you expect a solution or a diagnosis and a remedy. And so that's how I position what I do with my clients. And if they want a vendor, I will refer them to 50 people. I'm happy to do that. But if they need an expert, that's where I try to fit in. Over the years, a lot of different clients around the world, great, and some awards. And to jump in, so really quick, my background, I'm also from New York, and believe it or not, although if I had a lot to drink, you'll hear my accent. And then, but I lived in Copenhagen. I moved in, so I did an undergraduate degree, bachelor's in industrial design at Pratt, just over in Brooklyn. And 1996, 1,000 years ago, I worked here for a few years. I was doing remote control caddies and spice racks. So at that moment, you realize your soul was crushed by, that's not what I thought design was. I thought design was poetic and beautiful and interesting, and I was doing these deeply transactional products that were soulless and made landfill from the get-go. So I moved. I got up and went to Denmark on a Fulbright grant and fell in love with Copenhagen. I discovered furniture design and never looked back. So for me, furniture was my entry really into real design. I lived there for a few years, finished a master's course before I came down to Milan. I stayed there for a few years as I started to sell designs. I knocked on doors, went to see factories. A real advantage of living in Europe is manufacturing is happening there, not so much here. And when you're around factories and around manufacturing, you go see it firsthand. So that gave me a huge advantage to really get into how things are being made and the folks that make them and learn from just a variety of different sources. So Milan was really transformational for me. I had a personal life also in Paris. So I taught there, spent many years there with my, at the time, girlfriend. And so wonderful experiences before I eventually moved to London. I helped run Tom Dixon's design studio back when it was a handful of folks. And now it's, I think, 5 million people large now. I haven't counted. And so it really was another whole journey. I don't really get into much about that story, but working for others really was interesting, especially working for a designer maker. Because at that point, I was actually making these things. I would go source them. We would go to India, we'd go to Asia, we'd go around the world and find how to work with the factories, knowing that you own the making of it. It's very different than just kind of making a rendering and someone else kind of figures it out. Like, you're actually making it. So again, these sort of hands-on type experiences, I think, were very difficult to do here in the US. 2008, perfect timing, moved back to New York. Just in time for the economy to collapse. And but I came back happily too, because now I have 2 children, and so an 8 and a soon-to-be 9-year-old. And so here we are today, and I don't plan on moving anytime soon. So this sort of journey, I think, is all part of what you're about to see. But what underlies all of this is a philosophy. And I think this is something I took for granted for a very long time. Until I wrote this book, I started to really sit down and digest that I had a philosophy. I knew I did, but I didn't really understand how important it was, that it dictated not just how I designed, but also how I lived. And so it's something you might want to consider for yourselves, that you might have such a strong way of seeing the world that really click into that, see where it takes you. For me, it was formulated around this notion of truth, and I find very much drawn to mathematics. And so I say, okay, what does this even mean? I know in the political landscape today, this word truth has been hijacked now, so there's a lot of complexities to it. But I mean it in the sense of like mathematics, physics. So truth for me is timeless. It's absolutely universal. It's irrefutable. There's a fact is a fact, okay? And so a mathematical fact is a mathematical fact. So I consider cloud formations, I see these as truthful. This is not someone's opinion. This is a result of a context, of an ecosystem, right? And so I don't think we sit and judge a cloud. I think a cloud is accepted as a cloud, and we just move on. We can say it looks beautiful usually, and or no opinion, and we move on. I don't think we think it looks terrible. I don't think it's too white or it's not enough white. I don't think we think this way. Same for rock formations. You know, the tree is an example I think about quite often. If I take you to the park, I don't think we see a tree and you say, oh, that tree's got too many leaves on it, or it's too green, or, you know, the shape of the leaf is just not good shape. And all that to me is very interesting of a conversation. We wouldn't ever have that, I wouldn't think, because again, it's truthful. It's a result of an ecosystem. The shape of that tree, the shape of that leaf is driven by its context. So keep that in mind. So for me, I'm always seeking the solution, if it's the object, if it's the system, if it's the business we're building, of really what is the equivalent of that. So Darwin has this wonderful, of course, On the Origin of Species, wonderful book. But the discovery, we'll call it the theory around evolution. The finch has a different shaped beak based on what it's feeding on. So if it's nectar, if it's insect, if between bark, if it's between grass, whatever the application is, this animal has a unique solution for it. It's differentiated from the others because it has a different function. So to me, again, it's a truthful result. It's not an opinion. You wouldn't say, well, that one is not such a great finch. It's perfect for its application. Ironically, it's actually not perfect. You know, it's a little bit perfect, but it's not quite perfect. If it was perfect, there would be no more prey for it. There'd be no more insects. It would be too efficient. So there is this sort of balance, right, in nature, which is quite beautiful. So, but for all intents and purposes, we're trying to be as efficient, as mathematically solved, as elegant of a solution as we can get to. So the work that I do, and this is sort of the difference that I want to really impress upon you guys, is I design the context. I don't design the object. I don't really care about the object, actually. And I don't mean it that bluntly, but I kind of don't. It's really the context. Again, if I'm designing a tree, I get the brief to design a tree. What shape should the leaf be? I don't know. It depends on how much rainfall, depends on sunlight, depends on the environmental conditions. The list goes on, and that's the context. So we work on that. We define what that is. Some of them I'll know, some of them I'll have to research, some the rest of the people in the organization will know, and then some we won't, and we'll just have to manage. And that's really what the job is, I think, as a designer, is to have this contextual understanding. So I make this maybe a little bit more literal. So this sort of star is kind of the object here, right? And when you start to consider, that might be the tree, it could be the design solution, it could be whatever you want to pin as this sort of target. And you have all these governors that actually shape and inform what is the result. And the higher fidelity you have, and I know some of this is kind of hard to read, but the more fidelity you have in this approach, the higher quality of the result is. I have, and I don't have it today, unfortunately, but I did this same study with an amateur golfer and a professional golfer. It was very interesting to see this. If you take the perfect shot, we'll call it in golf, the perfect, you want the ball to go from here into the hole, very specific goal. That's the star. An amateur golfer, I had this person listed out, and they were thinking about, the slope, the kind of wind. They had their list of things they're considering before they strike the ball. And let's say there was 50 things that were informing all the decisions going into this process. I did the same with a professional golfer, and there's hundreds of considerations that this golfer had considered before just to make contact with the ball, and you realize that's the difference. The more fidelity we have, the higher quality the result tends to be. Do the same if you think about. It's actually quite interesting. Maybe I have it here as well. So it's thinking about the context. How do we really bring this together? So I call this context-based design. It's truly the philosophy. Okay. Some other examples. H2O. This to me is fantastically clear. H2O is what we call irreducibly complex. H1O is not drinking water. H3O is heavy water. It's not drinking water. H2O, period, is drinking water. Very clear. However, very complex compounds also can be equally as efficient based on what it's doing. So you can't add an extra nitrogen just because you want to. It fails. So you understand, there's a balance. It's not minimalism. It's an efficiency, if that makes sense. Okay. If you do martial arts, you would know what I'm talking about. There's a very precise path for efficiency. It's interesting. It's in golf, in tennis, these sort of sports. Again, the same thing. Interestingly enough, a dancer, I think, it's the same. You can see a good dancer from a bad dancer. You don't have to be even a dancer to recognize it. So an expert dancer can communicate what they're communicating through their motion because it has that precision again. It's very interesting to me. So hopefully that sort of makes some sense. So again, contextual design for me really offers us what I think, again, is a truthful solution. If I bring you, I always sort of allude to this example of a car, or take the Cybertruck or something kind of extreme. People might love it or hate it, but there's opinions because it is an opinion-driven result. And I don't think it shouldn't exist. It's just not the way I think. That's all. So now let's jump in. I'm going to show you a few things. It does kind of go a little all over the place here, and I think why not? So we're just going to do that. And if anything, again, just shout out. First of all, did anything not make sense before? I can just keep going, or you guys in good shape?
Where did those pictures of the golf dancers, where did they come from?
Yeah, I should have credited it. It's like a 1950s photographer, like fantastic photographer. There's a book, I believe it's The Art of Science. I can send it to you guys if you like. I actually don't recall the name. I see it in my mind. A French photographer, believe. She had done a lot of different various physics situations, and she documented it. Documenting science is what it's called. And I'm not sure those came from that, but the book does very similar content. Yeah. So all this to say, so over the years, now we're like making things. So it started as again, furniture guy, product guy, and I didn't know about strategy. And so there I was trying to think through, wonderful opportunities to make furniture. So there's this wonderful company called Fritz Hansen. They're a Danish company. They're very famous Arne Jacobsen furniture. You're all very familiar. It was an honor as an American to be the first American they've worked with. They asked me to create a table, and I thought, again, what is that? What do you do with that information? So it's just a table. So it's a kind of thing off the floor with legs. So it's not much you can do with this. I'm not an artist in that sense. I don't care about my opinion. I'm trying to provide what I think is good for this company. So I thought about what is really, again, a table, and the commonality kept coming up was this sort of spine of the table was sort of the same result. There's always the structure of the spine, and then I realized there's a structure of the ribs, the legs, and the skin, and all this kind of started to make some sense. So I approached the table as I feel nature would have, and we arrived to this very simple spine with ribs and getting it off the floor, legs, and a skin. Very simple. But the reason why this works from my perspective is that's also how Arne Jacobsen, the man who created most of their furniture, also thought. So our furniture works well together. So it could be this sort of China chair, it could be this sort of more contemporary Oxford chair, and it works in harmony because of the same logic. I actually had a professor at Pratt, he's long since passed, William Fogler, and I remember he used to talk about the form of the cat, and how a cat is perfect. And I remember he was really like adamant about it, and I didn't really know what the hell he meant, like a cat's perfect. And he'd say you could see the bones, but there's no excess, and like assuming it's not a fat cat, and he would really like articulate this, and I was still like, I don't get it. And I remember I was at one point I think I said, I really don't understand. And he brought me to, without saying strange, to the men's room, and he brought me to the sink, and he put my hand on the sink. And he says, do you feel the sink? And I remember like kind of, and I started to understand that there was like excess fat like in the sink. There was like an inefficiency in the form. And I said, okay, I think I got it. And then like years later, I like woke up and I said, now I understand. And it's almost like creating these forms from mathematics. Like bones grow this way, right? Bones don't have like extra bone for no reason. It's this purely this efficient geometry to solve the physical problem it's dealing with. And that's how I approach the forms that I do, the form giving. And so this is very much almost a skeleton in that way. So I think it's another way to solve these things. Yeah. So keep going here. We've got, again, there's some things that I think are fun too. Not as boring as hopefully that some of this might sound. The idea that I like things that are a bit surprising. So these stick insects, I don't know who doesn't find these incredibly fascinating. And I did a bar stool, very simple bar stool, but this has followed me around now for like 15 years. So it's this very simple line. And again, it was how much can I just reduce something to its most essential. So I kind of find myself as an essentialist, again, not a minimalist. I don't think I get into it here, but like the butterfly is not minimal. It's an essentialist form, and I think that's quite interesting. It could be very colorful and decorative to us, but it's purely efficient function, right? So that's the balance that I like to explore all the time. So anyhow, I'm going to fly through some of this stuff. I also do some strange things, which I think are kind of fun, is I was asked to make a house project in Germany, so kind of arbitrary. Very, very nice, fun thing to do. And they were very disappointed with it, and I'll explain why. So I was the first American, again, to now create this very prestigious project. I mean, we had Zaha Hadid, Konstantin Kričić. They had all these like superheroes making these projects, and then I'm now the first American. And so they were very excited to see like, what's this, how they said it's the house of the future. So that was the brief, okay. So I kind of couldn't wait to see what I'd come up with. And for me, the house of the future is like there's like no electronics actually. There's like no iPad. There's like nothing like this. To me, I'd rather have a wood box. To me, is the future. And they were very disappointed. They expected this American kind of Disneyland, and they said it was very Japanese in a negative way. And I thought, well, that's a compliment. I'll take that. And so we created this home that's based on sustenance and sustaining your mind and sustaining your body and sustaining your spirit. And for me, that's all that matters. I don't need devices and things. And so I remember I was reading a book at the time. My kids were small, and I was reading a book about birds. I'm reading about a picture book, and at the moment, it like dawns on me. I'm like, my kids are looking at tiny flat photographs of fake birds because they're not real. Like what kind of education is that for a bird? It's like some photographer's point of view. It's not in scale. It doesn't make any sound. It doesn't move, but like that's what they're seeing as a bird. So it doesn't make sense. And then I looked at an image of the archives of the Natural History Museum. I invite all of you to like Google that image. And they have an image of these kind of ancient ladies in the middle of the space with all the drawers pulled open, and it's just filled with all these archived birds. And you just think, oh, that's what I would like to live in, is just to have like the actual reality, or could live in the forest or live in the zoo, to have access to these like living things. So the thinking was to like get rid of like everything artificial and just actually experience real life. And why not have a kitchen where I could repair a motorcycle or cook spaghetti? Like, what's the difference, right? So the tools on the wall, for example, are meant to say what's the difference you're creating or destroying either way. So like, why do we have to say that only happens in that room? So anyhow, it's this very kind of conceptual space. For me, it was a lot of fun to really go through this exercise and build this thing. So in walls that could breathe, and just it was very much about being connected to nature while you're there. Kind of a lunar landscape. And then the light. I had no light in the space. I didn't want any light. If it gets dark, it gets dark. Like, that's it, and why not? And except in this one room, I wanted the moon or the sun. I don't know what it is. And the idea was that's the only light, and it doesn't get very bright. And in there, and I don't know if I have an image of it, there's also no bed. There's a match, like a giant futon to lay on, or a chaise to recline, or an upright chair to sit. There's just the different postures that you need. If you want to meditate, you want to sleep, you want to read, that's all you got. And like whatever you want to do. So it's like a contemplation. So, but boy, oh yeah, there it is. Man, and you would be surprised how many people came up to me angry when they came to see this. So, yeah, very funny. Other things that have happened over the years, this company in Denmark called Mater, I was part of the founding of this business. I'm very thrilled about, now it's from 2005, it's like 1,000 years ago. Mater is a very different animal, and even at that time, we were, Danish company looking to create product, new furniture. This was before kind of everyone has been doing this, so it was really new. But we wanted to do something different, and their intent was to do something different. I had a lot of supply chain resources, design ability, and all this stuff, but they were the business folks. So me plus a few other people helped build a business that was built on a different type of codex. So instead of just making objects, and I don't know what I might have here, but instead of these stools and kind of lamps and tables, which we made, but the difference was we wanted to do it in a really sustainable way, and this was in 2005. And sustainability then, for us, was still new, but we saw the real problem wasn't making a chair out of recyclable material. That wasn't actually really the problem to us. The problem was the vendors and the factories. They were set up terribly. And so what we did, we'd go around to various parts of the world. We would find really terrible factories that were polluting rivers. They had no ventilation. They were really exploiting workers. We found the worst offenders, and we chose to work with them. And then under a deal that we would help them improve. So we'd give them ventilation or water resources, filtration, you name it, and get them online in a good way. And then we would work further with them. But now they were available to work with the rest of the world. So it's a different way to think about how to engage companies. And so it was pretty cool. And Mater's still alive today. Mater means mother in Latin. Simple project for Herman Miller several years ago, and again, they do these kind of spaceship chairs, and so I did the table here, the desk, and very, very simple. I mean, I consider the Eames legacy of plywood, and so I wanted to leverage that in a way and sort of re-explore it in a more contemporary context. If anyone's ever sat at a table before, which I think I hazard a guess you have, the edges of the table are always sharp for some reason, and I just wanted to fold the edge so that I can actually rest my wrists or my arms on the edge of the table. And by doing that, it gives structure to the top, and therefore we can actually the legs come off, and you can transport the whole thing in a kind of pizza box. So it was kind of a win-win thing. So this very simple form gave it a lot of simplicity. Yeah. I think Eames would have got it, if I say that. So more recent project, Fragment, excuse me, Swedish company called Fogia. Fantastic company if you haven't heard of them. They are sort of a legacy company that's been growing up over the years and doing cool new things. And again, we wanted to do something with a different approach. It's the sofa portion, not the armchair. And Fragment, the idea behind it was, and this is where I start to kind of shed a little light into how do you help a company? They're like, just let's make a sofa. And like, okay, but it's got to be more than that. It's got to do something better. Otherwise, why bother? And so we had this idea of this like super modular thing. They sell in contract furniture and they sell in residential furniture. So can we make a handful of components that covers both? And so then it's super, super easy for them to serve those markets. And then the customer can be very happily specify exactly what they want. So that's what Fragment became. It's very simple. There's like power integrated in it. The tables move. Like everything is super simple. And then you can swap out and change components at any time. Add high walls, whatever it is you need. So it's a kind of like do-all solution, if that makes sense. I've worked for many years with Issey Miyake, and wonderful brand. I mean, it's true artist, true innovator, Miyake. And I've had the fortune to design many of their fragrance bottles. Kind of a different animal from everything else I've been doing. And somehow we fell into each other with having a very simple kind of reductionist mentality, and I think that suited their brand well. So over the years, I've been designing several of their bottles. This is the most recent one. I think it's interesting to share because it's this kind of disc in a way. It's a fragrance, and it lays flat. And a couple of reasons why it does. And number one, it's just kind of funny. If I go back a sec, like this one, for example. This is not how it looks in the shop. In the shop, the cap is always gone. They always take it off because people steal it, so they don't want people to take it. So it's always without the cap. So if you design this kind of whatever great cap, it's like always gone. So you have this kind of naked bottle there, and it's just no one really cares. So I wanted to integrate the cap. So okay, that's like one thought. But what I did, which I think is more interesting, was they have a very strict supply chain. They work with the same factory since 1,000 years. It turns out most fragrance companies use the same factory. And so when you're saying things like, let's do this with a sustainable approach, they're saying no, like, nah, they're not interested. It's just a big machine. Like you're either on that train or you're not in it at all. So, so the way I approached it was, well, how can I make what they're going to make better? And so what we did was we turned it flat. And by doing this, it kind of gets a little nerdy, but we've taken about 12% of the material out because it doesn't need to have thickness to support itself. And by doing that, times a bazillion that they sell, that's a huge, huge number. And it also reduces the packaging by 33%. So it's a huge impact on that side. They save a bunch of money. They can reduce the cost to the end user. And also environmentally, it's a big lift. So you try to work also within the scenarios. You'll find really soon there's a lot of companies that you work with that don't care about sustainability or they have no ability to deal with it. So it's up to you to kind of really figure out how can you kind of sneak it in there, if that makes sense. And I don't even think they know it, by the way. More recently, a Path chair, we call it, for human scale. If you've ever heard of these guys, they do wonderful ergonomics. And so on the heels of this Miyake project, one of the women in my studio, she was saying, my husband and I, we like turn off the water when we brush our teeth, like he's eating vegan, like we recycle everything in the house, like they're doing everything, And then she says, how do I reconcile that I come to work and we're like making stuff? Right? We're making objects that like go back out into the world. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's fair point. I'm not going to lie, And so while we're in this conversation, I was having a conversation with Human Scale, and they make office chairs. And her comment helped, and this is now maybe 8 years ago, and this comment shifted a bit on how I think about designing too. So again, we look for kind of terrible offending products now is the way we deal with it. So I told her, I said, we're going to design a task chair for this company. She says, task chairs, do you want to do a task chair? I'm like, no, I don't really care. And then it's not that interesting to me. It's very complicated, very technical. But there's tens of thousands of these a year that get thrown away. And tens of thousands. They're made from 80 to 100 or plus components. So they're sourced from just dozens of factories. They are horrible offenders on the environment. So why don't we make a really, really sustainable one? So this chair became the world's most sustainable task chair. And so a couple things about it. It's a knitted cover. It's not a textile, traditional textile. So zero cut and sew, which means there's no waste, number one. Number two, since it's knitted over a frame, so it's suspended. It's like a mesh chair, so there's no foam. So you're actually sitting in air, if that makes sense. So it's breathes and all that kind of good stuff. We designed the base to be flat so that it actually stacks on the containers, so it reduces deeply the amount that you can transport. The arms are that wide, so you can transport the back and arms flat with the base. So it's almost a pizza box. It's like half-size box. So all these things add up. We have 32 pounds of ocean-bound plastic. I mean, it's just one thing after the next to reach this benchmark that nobody in the industry is able to do. So I'm really proud of this, and I appreciated her like having this kind of existential crisis of like, I can't do good at home and do bad at work, you know. And so I'm like, cool. So we're going to do good at work. So that's what we've been up to. So when this chair goes a little further, there's less componentry because we're also using what we call a gravity mechanism. So inside of this chair, it's very, very simplified. Most chairs, as you know, there's all these knobs, levers, dials, locks. Nobody knows how to use them, I'm sorry. Like, I had sat in the Aeron chair for 1,000 years. I didn't know how to use it, and I designed these chairs. So what happens with Path is there's nothing inside. You sit on it, and it uses your body weight. And as you recline, the chair just adapts to you. Done. So no matter who sits in the chair, it adapts to them instantly. So it's as if it's made for them. So that's beautiful, and that keeps you healthy as well, because all these task chairs, when you don't know how to mess with them, you end up sitting hunched over because the chair doesn't support you. It's a problem. So this solves that physical problem, and we do it with less components. So it's kind of this win-win. So this is Path. And then the jump in. So I evolved over the years. I said out of frustration, which is true. So I started to do these roles. I call strategic advisor. It's kind of gray because what does that really mean? But I work as creative director. I work as consigliere. I work as someone the clients need to vent. And you know, like it's a variety of things. So it's never just like as black and white as like, cool, you're an advisor. You do these 5 things. It's could be quite all over the place. I'm a kind of fixer. I like to go in and just like deal with things. So there's a brand such as HBF at the time that was dying and had pretty good old portfolio, but they failed to evolve. But any one of us in the room would see what the problems were. This isn't, you don't need to be a genius to see this. You can see right away, like I wouldn't buy these things, or they're irrelevant, or they're just dated. Like there's no secret, right? And I think the biggest challenge is these companies never hear the truth. They don't have anyone that has kind of the guts to just say it. And I think that goes a long way. If you're careful, it goes a long way. I mean, careful in the way of being professional about it. It's not, but there's an expression a colleague had said once, which I really appreciated. He says, your client is inside the jar and you're on the outside. You could read the label. They can't. Think about that. When you're on the outside, you have such an advantage to provide. So as an advisor, so if that's a role you choose to take, it's a very powerful place to be in. You could see the problems from a mile away, and they don't see them at all. Or they see them, but they don't know how to manage them, or they're worried about the politics, or it's an incomplete picture, but you see it a mile away. They had these types of products. It was kind of dated. Great in the 1980s, early 1990s, no problem, I get it. But what we did was we started to really freshen them and bring them somewhere new, but using their same old technologies. This image kind of blows out here, but we're using, this is now almost 15 years old, it's using running shoes mesh. So we are eliminating all the bulky foam, all the staples, all the glue, and you just have this translucent mesh now, which brings a lightness to the chair, but it's still using their facility in the same way they used before. So for them, it's comfortable to make. It's kind of like a transitional piece to the future for them, and so that's like where I'm placing it for them, not about what I want, it's what they need. So, and we've taken these sort of same kind of chunky chairs and kind of lightened them up, thinned them up. But then we also thought about new ways of working, and this again is now 12 years old or so, and we were exploring what we called the collaborative zone. Like this was brand new at the time. Like everyone still had cubicles. So we were like, what if we can make this tessellation that'll allow folks to sit and work outside of the work zone? That was a crazy idea, and like, so these are the things that enables you, like you have to sort of embrace that when you run into these things. I think you intuitively know, like, I wouldn't work in a cubicle. I won't want to work in one. So then, well, what do you want to work? And then follow that and see where it takes you if you're in this type of sector. So gives you a little bit of an idea. I did all the photography as well, try to show them that even their old stuff could look great. We can, brush up the finishes and all this kind of stuff. And, and we were able to help provide them. And it's a wonderful thing. So over the years, it's been, these types of relationships, like how do you go in and really help lift? I love walking into the factory. My dad was a factory guy. He was a cabinet maker. So for me, and I'll never forget, my brother was a pilot, military pilot. And I remember my dad always said, like, don't forget the people in the factories. Like to my brother, don't forget the mechanics and the weapons guys. And like, don't just sit up in your like fancy office here, And so we never did. We always appreciated these folks. And when I walk into the workshops, it's like I can't do anything without these people. And these folks are able to, like, I want to see them thrive. And like, it's really important for me. So when I see there's 50 people and the next year there's like 70 people and the next year there's like 150, I go, okay, well, we're like doing it right. That's really important to me. So, and that's what happened with HBF. Created the collateral for them. And again, there's no boundaries, right? I'm an advisor, but all of a sudden I'm art directing, I'm designing for them. Like there's no limits to what you might do. I'm storytelling, we're doing ads for them. Like you never know where it goes. You just want to solve their problem. So that's what you end up doing. We created showrooms for them. All of a sudden I'm designing showrooms, which goes on and on. So you get a little bit of an idea of how this stuff kind of evolves. Jensen's another one. I'm getting towards the end here. Am I okay on time? No one's leaving. George Jensen, a Danish silversmith. I had moved, when I told you earlier, I was living in Denmark, so I love this brand. And like another one dying. It's like, what's going on? And they're just falling out of irrelevance. I remember when I was living in Denmark, excuse me, there was Arne Jacobsen's very famous 7 chair, very well-known chair. I remember at a flea market, it cost me 20 Danish crowns, which at the time was $3, and a vintage chair, like one of the world's most famous chairs. And I remember buying this thing, and I asked the guy, I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, it's grandma's old furniture, And so to each his own, but same with Jensen, it became kind of old lady stuff, So we ended up getting in there, I say we, meaning the team, and we created, we helped breathe life to it, brought color to it. We helped energize they call the smithy, which is the silversmith there, and kind of an old tradition that we try to help bring back and energize again. And then simple things. So there, for example, this was one of their famous brooches, a very classic Danish design. It's a 100-plus-year-old company. And I remember they were very famous, it's called Moonlight, and it's... they have a series of, I forget, I think it was all one color. And I remember we were all chatting with the CEO, like, what's going, yeah, we have all this inventory in the basement, And I'm like, what do you mean? So we went down and they have all these stones, these gemstones, just like drawers full of gemstones, millions of dollars worth of gemstones. And like, what's wrong with, what are we doing? Why are we not using these? He goes, well, because they're not perfect. They have like, blemishes or like inclusions and this. And I'm like, these are amazing. And turns out we ended up using them because the ones they do use look fake because they're perfect. So when we went to go through the inventory and we liked the inclusions because people saw them as real. What do you know? It didn't take a designer to figure that out, but it did. So Jensen's another one. And they do we do watches. We did a whole series of products with them, silversmith, and then also the steel work as well. So again, it's about solving their problem and trying to get them into new markets around the world. So we've introduced new materiality to them. So it's beyond just doing what they always do. I feel like with most companies, we try to do what they're asking for and then a little more, and to try to nudge them in a direction. It's very rare that we just like jump 10 years ahead. You can't. You have to I find you have to kind of ease them along. So. Shops, it just goes on and on. Jumping, I think in my last couple here, I'll go quick because I feel like I might be going long. 3M, hopefully you guys know 3M, like to me, one of the most amazing brands ever. Everyone's like, yeah, they make Post-its. I'm like, yeah, okay, they make like everything, not just Post-its. Wonderful chemical-based type company, technology company. And I had given a talk some years ago in the city here, and hit it off. So one of the guys had said, come to Minnesota and you should talk to our folks. They're based out in St. Paul. And so I ended up speaking at 3M. And I gave a lecture around, it was interesting, around some, like the ways I saw design, something similar in some ways, philosophy. But I talked about their philosophy. And I talked about the butterfly, because the butterfly, and I remember asking the crowd, do you understand why the butterfly is so important to 3M? And the crazy thing was we had like 100 engineers and scientists, or a huge room of people. No response. One guy in the back like raised his hands, like old guy, and he's like, "Yeah, the morpho butterfly." And I was like, "That's right." And like, go on. And he said that was the foundation for half of their technologies, was the science behind what a morpho is. And the fact that none of these folks knew that really said something to me, that they're not that they're missing something. It's just they're on a different track. But there was such simplicity. The morpho butterfly, the blue butterfly, there's no blue pigment. It's not colored blue. It's refracting blue light. That's why it looks blue. So some of these older scientists understood that and created films that can reject and control various light spectrums. And there's the films that are stacked up sometimes with 500 layers, and it's still thinner than paper, but it reflects light in a variety of different ways. So they've kind of cracked this incredible technology. So by the way, it's like in every device near you in this room, their films are in there. Your phones have gotten smaller a little bit because they're more efficient batteries and LEDs, but also because of light management thanks to 3M films. And so it's pretty interesting. So all this, long story short, this division of 3M said, "Can you help us create a lighting company?" I was like, "Of course, I would love to." And I had already been working with Tom Dixon. I already understood the architects and designer space here in the US, so I was a good candidate to help them. So we helped stand up a lighting business, and we had about 18 months to do it. And just to share, I think there's some insights here that are useful, is I created a book. I don't know if I kind of get into it. I had to educate the folks on what we were doing, because most of them were lawyers or chemical engineers and scientists. Design for them was not that comfortable, and they thought you just make things look cool. They didn't understand at all really the value. We're here to build a business. And so we had to, I don't know how far I go with this, but we had to educate them on what it is we're doing. And so long story short, actually, I'm going to get into this product in a second. So we created various events. We stood up the business, and we were rolling within 18 months. It was very, very cool. And it couldn't have been done without their scientists, but we also had to figure out how to communicate with them. So some learning curves that were gained there. This was showing some of the results. I kind of have this a little bit out of order. But we would also create events for them. So it goes a little further in the sense of, we're 3M, we've created this new business, but no one in the world knows. So we flew to London, we created this space, and I had 50 of the world's top design writers go to this event, meet the executives, hand off, you guys talk. And that's what we did. And we tried to show them the cool stuff we were doing as 3M, the kind of lab was available to them. And it just, took off. And when you got something good, I think, not because we designed it, meaning 3M made something good, it's going to work. And so we literally hold the hand and take them on a date. Did all their photography for various things, all their stands, life goes on. But I want to get you to the product. The product's actually pretty cool. This makes me laugh. If you've ever seen a trade event where there would be a 3M, it's terrible. It's like sandpaper and adhesives. It's the most boring looking thing. And I made a joke. I said, "Look, there's somebody under 200 years old at your stand." And because it's so boring. And what we did was this kind of laboratory. It was really beautiful. And again, the scientists were like, "What are we doing?" And but this was design, You compel people and make it beautiful. So anyhow, but that light, one of the lights you saw. So as the home stretch here, there's a couple more products. I'm trying to build to a little bit of a crescendo here. There's one of the 3M products we did, one of the scientists I chatted with, a French guy, and he was amazing. And he said light was 100% predictable. So if you've referred to my love for mathematics, I'm like, okay, this is cool. Light is 100% predictable. What does that really mean? And he said, well, we can control every photon and place it where we want. I go, wow, that's amazing. How does this work? So this image came to my mind. I said, can we light architecture like we light a phone? Because that would be pretty interesting, because a phone's incredibly efficient. So why is an architecture as efficient? So this idea of how can we replicate, sort of repopulate light instead of wasting it. Glare tends to be waste. So he showed me this film. It's ESR film. It's got 500 layers. It's the most reflective material in the world. It's nearly 100% reflective. A mirror is like 90% reflective, something like that. So this is like mind-boggling. When you look at it, it's hard to understand because it's weird. It's like you're looking through it. And it's thinner than paper. It's, I think, yeah, it's in your devices. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say that, but it's everywhere. So we wanted to use this film to capture light and to redistribute light through architecture, just how it works in your phone. That same scientist, this Frenchman, came back with this ray trace. So I sort of said, I just want light to go, I want an LED, and I want a light, and I like left. I kind of was very like, I don't know what I'm doing, bye. And he started with this, said, okay, we'll start with a single LED. These little shapes are those reflective lenses. And then he started iterating it. And we arrived to this. And it's this crazy thing where it has two LEDs, one on top, one on bottom, in the middle. And it's like a waterfall of light that's sort of cascading across the system. So it's a lamp with no power except just in the middle. So this whole, it's like we're whipping light around just like by reflection, if that makes sense. So this room was lit by 2, 4, 6, 12 LEDs minus the one in the back. The entire room, which is kind of amazing. And so it's super, super efficient. If you put your hand like here, the light just turns off because it's just bouncing. There's no light source. The craziest thing was we have a patent around it with 3M. It's called a virtual LED. So we're virtually replicating the light. So I don't think I have an image here to explain it. What's so crazy about it, so there's nothing there. But the optics, so if you take, you know those funhouse mirrors, which are kind of like you stand in front and you're like wonky, right? What's happening is your image, so imagine an image where you're wonky, and then it's reflecting it to the opposite, where now you look normal, and then it's sending that image to another wonky one, and then to a normal, and to a wonky, and it's repeating it. So what's happening is the LED itself is that image. So as you look down the system, you see the LED as if it's there, and that's what's making the light. But it's an image of the LED. It's not even there. It's a reflection of a reflection of a reflection. It's totally crazy. You can see the manufacturer of the LED's name written on it, even though it's not there. It's super crazy. And I remember I asked the French scientist, I said, well, okay, how'd you do this? And he goes, oh, I just put it in the computer, and like, and I remember laughing, and I said, okay, so you didn't really do anything. And then he looked at me very seriously and he goes, but I wrote the software. And I was like, I was like, all right, you got me. Fair enough. So this was a way to sort of flex 3M's muscles, do something that no one in the world can do. I mean, this is 3M. You know, most companies, you style light, you buy a part from, somewhere in the world, you stick it in a thing and you call it your design. This is like we can build light from scratch. We can build the technologies. And some of this thinking became part of how they deliver sunlight into architecture, which is amazing. So it's like beautiful to work with this company. So we created this thing. This is called Lightfalls. But we went further than that. We wanted to create a more sort of more, I don't want to say commercial, but more accessible version of this. So we created this called Vessel. And Vessel uses the same technology in a really small package now. Now it's just a single LED, and it looks like an empty glass of water. It's quartz glass. And we have in the sort of top there, we're using the same optic, to hide the LED, but it still distributes the light. So it looks like empty glass of water with light just coming out. It's completely crazy. And again, it couldn't have been done without these guys. And we designed it backwards, meaning I drew on the table. I want it to be this diameter of light, this much fall off, this even. Like I designed the light, and then we reverse engineered what it needs to be to do that. And again, what a luxury to work with such a company. So this is Vessel. And my last bits here, as you heard earlier, I've created this business called Better Lab. So Better Lab's a kind of different animal. We've been serving clients now 25 years, and that's great. I mean, I love it, but it's still their desires, their needs, and I have needs too. And so all these years of working with various scientists and these types of people I love, I was having a conversation, one scientist, and he's credited with inventing the commercialized LED. okay, the guy is like genius. It's not the Japanese gentleman that invented the LED. This guy created how to scale the LED for manufacturing. He's known for doing the light in the International Space Station. He's legend in the optics and lighting world. And so I've known him over the years through a mutual friend. And I was having kind of a beer equivalent with him. And I asked him, what are you afraid of in the world as a scientist? And he said, one, he said pandemic. And I kind of like shrugged that off. And then number two was eye health. And I thought, what do you mean eye health? And he said, yeah, because since he made the LED, was one of these guys, he's like, the new LEDs are not good. And I'm like, okay, tell me more. And he said, well, the original LEDs, when they made them, it was a full spectrum of light. And that's what was available at the time, the technology was, and it was cool. As LEDs got more advanced, they value engineered the full spectrum down to the visible spectrum only. And by doing that, they were less hot, they were more efficient, okay, that's all good, but it's not healthy. So now all of our screens, all of our lighting indoors, for the most part, is now this limited spectrum of light. And he says, if we don't get a full spectrum of light, our eye does not fully develop as a child. And then the bad news is, here it comes, you have, so the first world problem, because now you have kids that are living on their iPads, they're not outside, when their screen time has replaced outdoor time. In parts of Asia, you have longer school days. You have, they even have buildings that are now partially underground. The list goes on, and the World Health Organization has pinned, it's called myopia, this eye condition, as the largest threat to eye health this century, and that half of the globe will be myopic by 2050, and 10% of these people will be blind in their lifetime. So it's a real problem. If you have small kids, if you have nieces, nephews, cousins, get outside and play. That's kind of the biggest solution. You don't need to buy something. Just get out and get some sunlight. And what it does, it stimulates full development of the eye, which up until age 13 or 14 or so. However, this gentleman, since he knew this was an emerging problem, he had written a patent on how to reverse it. I go, well, that's cool. And he says, number one is go outside. Number two is if you can't, because a lot of kids can't for whatever reasons or don't, he had this patent where if we can just give back the right spectrum of light, we'll be okay. Okay. It'll not only deal with the symptoms, it'll reverse myopia. And there are chemicals you can take. There's hard contact lenses. There's things out there, but they don't reverse myopia. They slow it down. But his would reverse it. I thought, okay, this is cool. So Better Lab is the idea of partnering with scientists and innovators, technologists, and we help sort of breathe life to these things so that his idea is great, but it's not a solution, it's an idea. So let me go further here. Excuse me. So now I've given you the whole story. We can sort of bounce through some of this. And we created this concept of these glasses. And let me see. So those rings carry the effective light that's required to reverse myopia. But those rings, and this was a cool story. So Fred, this scientist, we were on a flight, and he was looking down at the strips, the exit light, glow-in-the-dark things on the ground. And he's like, I think that's the spectrum of light we need. And I thought, like, what are you talking about? And so apparently it is. And we tracked down, there's a company that makes the phosphor that glows in the dark, and for a few pennies, we can have it built into the frame or into these rings. And so as you walk outside or as you are in any environment, it'll continue to diffuse the healthy spectrum of light. And you can take it off if you want, you can leave it on as you like. But in parallel to this, we're creating a little pin that you could wear, and we'll give it away that if just get sunlight, it changes to the right color when you've had enough sunlight. So like we're not trying to sell you glasses. If you need it, if now you have the symptoms, then you want to actively use these glasses. So so you get this kind of cool effect of how they actually glow in the dark. So the same guy, Fred, his concerns around pandemic, which I always thought was very funny at the time. Sure enough, that was like in 2017. It's like go time traveling and like still blowing it on the stock market. Like it didn't work, like I had like, it's coming and you still got it wrong, So Fred's concern with pandemic, he had, long story really short, Fred's story, doing a lot of work with NASA, they had apparently had seen some of the astronauts were saying, hey, on the Russian side, they have some kind of cool light. We don't really know what's going on there, but they're using it to kind of deal with cleaning the space station, like on their part. So over the years, Fred and those guys are smart folks too, figured out that the Russian side was using a certain spectrum of light for UV light, but even a more specific UVC light, so that it's human safe. You know, UV light is quite destructive, but UVC is actually fine. It's a kind of extreme version of UV. And so Fred created a patent around this because most don't when things are in the space station, since it's not in front of eyeballs. You rather not talk about it. And if you patent it, it becomes known. So, but Fred was a businessman too and still took the patent and got it done. 2019 comes, pandemic shows up, everyone's having, for good reason, panic. Fred was contacted by various government agencies saying, hey, we see you have a patent, et cetera. And Fred had an investor ready and decided to stand up a lighting company by putting this type of light now within architecture. So I started to help his business in designing fixtures for within architecture. So just in the space station, you can now walk into your restaurant and it will be safe from any airborne pathogen or surface-bound pathogen thanks to this light. Sounds like a good idea. So we were working on that for a while, and I wasn't so convinced. It was still not great because the space station is kind of small, modern architecture is quite high, and there's an efficiency issue with distance. You also have this problem of it's expensive. There's a vaccine that's in the pipeline. Like, I don't know, Fred, like I'm not seeing it. Meanwhile, I'm taking my little kids to like the store and like you putting Purell like all over your hands. And I don't want a little kid or me like just lathering up in liquid sanitizers. It doesn't seem right. So what chemicals are in there, I just don't know. And so I kind of don't think it's that much of a genius stroke, but I'm like, why don't we take that light and just like put it there? And like, why do we don't need the liquid sanitizer. So we had this idea of creating a light-enabled sanitization unit, right? And turns out 2% of the global carbon footprint is associated with hand sanitizers, the liquid sanitizer. It's unbelievable. Think of all the transport, all the trucks carrying jugs and gallons of this stuff around the world. The water consumption to make it, the plastic bottle waste, all of this that goes with it. It's a fire hazard. It causes eczema. You can't have over 10 gallons in a closet and you're in a commercial application as being a fire hazard. They have to staff it, so it's always maintained, it's always refilled. The list goes on, and then it kind of gets a little worse where there's some questionable health benefits of actually putting this on your skin. And number two is it doesn't work that well. It takes about 90 seconds, and it doesn't get in all the nooks and crannies of your hands. It's only kind of generally, when it's generally applied, does it kind of deal with it. So it's not so great. So our idea was using this light, and so we're using a very specific spectrum of light. It's human safe, and for several $100s instead of thousands of dollars per location that's using this stuff, year after year, we can eliminate all the pathogen on the hand, and it gets within all the nooks and crannies. It happens in 3 seconds. It's very fast, and then environmentally, it's fantastic. I designed it in an extruded aluminum so that it's also meant to be really sustainable by using recycled aluminum. Components also disassemble very easily, so we were thinking about that from the start. And so this is now a new project that we're soon to bring, so I'm very happy about this. And my very last is something totally different, and I thought I'd just throw this in, because everyone always asks me what's like my favorite thing I've ever designed, and it's this, because it's completely ridiculous. I was asked to make a rosary bead, which is kind of amazing to me. I'm a non-theist, whatever you want to call it. I'm not Christian. I'm not anything. And I find it hilarious that they asked me to create a rosary. And then they asked it to be like kind of more millennial and kind of younger. And I thought like, okay, like this is even more funny. So the world's most sold rosary at this company, which is very famous, is this, right? And okay, fair enough. So, but I went through this process, I think as a designer does, is like, I don't know anything about prayer and like this whole thing. So I started to study it. And so, okay, it's this cadence and there's this counting involved. And I don't remember all the stories now, but the ritual of prayer. And I found that cool. I'm like, I can support it. I'm not opposed to it at all. Like, so I can appreciate that this is really meaningful to this person. And I'm like, that's cool. So, but then why does it look that way? why is there this sort of imposed guilt and grief and pain? And I know there's some reasoning there. I've spoke to many people, and there's a reminder of sufferingness that's intentional. Like, I see that. But when you really get to the belly of it, it's about the prayer. And that I'm like, cool. So I can support. So I thought, what can I do to just get rid of all the other opinion again and just leave behind just the prayer? So we used thread, try to be as humble as possible, and we just knotted the thread, and we created this tiniest little loop for the cross, and it's this kind of little lint ball. You can ball it up into your fingertips and just leave it in your pocket. And this was what we ended up with. And so it's meant to just be really about the prayer, not about the object at all, and for sure not about me. So gives you some sense of it. And all this sort of comes together. I guess I mentioned the book here. So we just wrote it. I'm really excited to share it with you guys. And it's came out in June. A great friend of mine, Henrik Nygren in Sweden, designed it. It's really, really beautiful. And we wanted to do something different. I'm just turned 50, so I'm at this place of like, I'd like to transfer knowledge. Like a lot of this stuff I think about, I never really speak about it. I don't really have opportunities so often to share it. It's kind of, in the business context, some don't even care, So for me, writing this book was quite important. So it goes into the idea of design as expertise, go a little bit further into understanding, meeting the need, like how important that is, into the idea of this context. And then the nice thing is towards the end, there's interviews with people, because I thought it'd be cool to sort of bring it to life. Excuse me. So it's not just sort of me rambling. There's a very short bit, which is me rambling. But then I chat with these 5 folks. So Michael Beirut, for example, to even Fred, my scientist buddy. So we have different takes of different point of views and how they see design integrating with what they do. So for me, it's kind of fun. And then sort of photos from the field. So things that I've kind of been seeing, kind of like a printed Instagram in a way. And so thank you so much. I really appreciate it, everyone.